Hi, and welcome to the next session of our venture and capital interviews. Today we have the CEO of Scale Investors, and obviously Ariane. And now I've met Ariane about 6 months ago?
It's
So,
been over a year, I think, but we're both in separate cities, and that's no longer an issue. But yeah, we met about a year ago.
and I remember our first meeting, we went out for a lunch, and I remember I said, like, I literally just walked away. I thought, power woman right there, and I know, what I'll do is I'll give you the opportunity to talk about your background. And then obviously I'd love to sort of give some more insight into how sort of Scale is operating. So if we can kick off there, that would be great.
Sure, and thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. So my background was investment banking. I started in Wall Street in the late '90s. I did a degree in economics and mathematics, and I really enjoyed investing from a very early age. So that was something that definitely appealed. I worked in private wealth, then debt capital markets and equity capital markets, and then M&A in New York, London, Tokyo, and then Hong Kong, where I helped. I moved across to Goldman Sachs to help set up their hedge fund business in the 2000s. And along the way, I met my Australian husband, who brought me back to Melbourne in 2010. And about 3 years ago, I came across as this and um, doing private capital startups, more specifically to support female-led startups, and that narrative and that purpose around gender diversity definitely resonated for me, having worked in senior roles in investment banking and junior roles in financial services, where often I was the only woman in the room. I definitely experienced that personally and professionally. And so when I saw Scale get launched, I thought this is a great purpose, and the space is growing. So it's a really exciting asset class.
And what I found interesting, you mentioned about sort of Hong Kong, and sort of that must have been an interesting period being at Goldman Sachs in Hong Kong in sort of that 2000s period.
Yeah, it was great. And look, you learn a lot on the journey, as we all do, but working in that organization and becoming effective and efficient for me, again, was really compelling. I see that now we're getting a lot of collaboration, like the conversation we're having now,
Mm.
in venture capital and in angel investing, which is specifically what Scale does. For me personally and professionally, the people I've worked best with in my career are the ones who recognize that as individuals, we're not the only person who can deliver to a goal. And the goal here is being able to really leverage this asset class and to back these founders as effectively as possible. And frankly speaking, this asset class at the moment in this market and even globally is not as effective and efficient as it could be.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that's something which you guys do and we're working very hard on, particularly for the female founders. But yeah, working at Goldman, you learn how to collaborate, you learn how to leverage technology, you learn how to really operate quite efficiently with other smart people. And then, obviously in the 2000s, hedge funds were the flavor of the decade.
Yeah.
So got to work in some really complicated, complex technical styles of arbitrage, which again, I found really interesting and exciting, and I learned a lot along the way.
So just with Scale, what I'd love to understand is, let's say I'm a female investor and I'm thinking about sort of going into this space. How do you involve more female investors into this area? And then also I'll get onto the founders in a second, what you're looking for. But typically, how do you attract them? How do you approach them? And why do they typically participate with Scale?
Yeah, sure. And it's a great question. I think to my earlier point around arbitrage, we're clearly articulating that investment thesis that there is a very compelling arbitrage opportunity in markets now to get more female leadership and more capital activated from women in markets. The market's been talking about this for decades, but
Yeah.
it's never been marketed as a commercial or an investment return thematic that I've seen before. And Scale was founded by four visionary women: Carol Schwartz, Susan Oliver, our chair, my predecessor, Laura McKenzie, and Annette Kimmitt, who's now the CEO at Minter Ellison. And, they saw a clear market gap back then, and they were able to activate their networks of senior women who had capital to invest in our investment thematic to activate capital for female-led startups. And so that was the inception of where Scale is now 7 years later, which is the market's growing, the founder community is really impressive. It's still really hard for founders to access capital. It's particularly hard, and the statistics are super clear, that less than 5% of venture capital funding goes to female founders.
Wow.
So it's really particularly hard for female founders to access capital. And the banks in Australia are fine, but they haven't historically funded startups. So you've got this really interesting niche arbitrage opportunity through Scale to not only come along and get access to great pipeline of founders, but you've also got the opportunity to be educated about the asset class. How does venture capital work? What is angel investing? What does it mean to be an angel investor? What are the risks? How do the rewards come together? What are the structures? We do a lot on the documentation structuring side as well to make it easier for investors. But what is super exciting for me at a personal level also is the caliber of people in Australia today who are really starting to understand this this opportunity, and also
And just sorry, just your internet sort of dropped out there just quickly. I was just going to say, do you find they're sort of similar to you, where you've got obviously a very strong background in finance, or you find that they're sort of quite people that are very senior executives that are now sort of either looking to give back or just looking to add value with the skill set they've built over time? Is that typically what the sort of people that join Scale?
There's definitely almost a philanthropic aspect to it, and we are structured as a not-for-profit ourselves.
Yeah.
We were originally backed by the Victorian state government. We're now working very closely with Launch Vic, who recognizes that getting really strong angel investing networks for Victoria, and obviously that'll leverage across the country, is the right thing to do. And the global studies that have been done have proven that to be the case. It's hard to sort of pigeonhole yourself and say, well, everybody else is like me. I've met the most amazing men and women, because we have men and male investors in our network who just really see the market problem and the market opportunity. And without
just quickly, that's a really good point. I actually didn't know that. I didn't know that male investors were allowed to participate in Scale.
Oh yeah, and I'm glad you brought it up, because it's a misconception.
Yeah.
And when I started in my role, people would look at me and they'd say, "Oh, what are you doing that for?" And you're the women, and you almost have this really weird dynamic going on. And so we're very inclusive.
Yeah.
The whole purpose is about activating capital in a niche and in a market segment which is being underfunded.
Gotcha.
So there's a lot of great guys who get that. And for the guys who are watching this, give us a call.
And when they come in, like you mentioned about you're actively sort of training and you're actively getting people involved. Are you meeting with is your group meeting like once a month, once every 2 months, and what does that sort of typically look like?
Sure. So the silver line COVID for us is that we have managed to pivot everything to be done online, which has actually played to our strengths with great technology, excepting my internet today. I haven't got the NBN yet, but we meet. We currently have events every single week. So a call, and we.
Your internet literally just dropped out, as you said. We have meetings every few.
Yeah. So we have pitching events approximately every 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay.
But we also have events every week. So through Scale, we've got a lunchtime connector series, which builds engagement in our community. We also have a governance series to help investors become better informed about what the obligations and duties and responsibilities are if you're on the board of a startup, and if you're even thinking about getting onto the board of a startup, and how that translates versus, say, an ASX role.
Yeah.
So that's been a really interesting conversation, a really strong, positive conversation to bridge the gap between the startup community and the corporate community. And then obviously, as I mentioned, we have our pitching events. So we'll introduce founders to our investors every other month. Our pipeline is super strong, and my colleague Chelsea Newell works really well with founders, and we host monthly office hours for founders to come along, where Chelsea and I will speak to them about our model, who we are, and how to access capital through scale investors.
Interesting. So, and founders, female founders, they access you, I assume, through the Scale website or just through LinkedIn or wherever it may be?
Yeah, so it's probably similar to other businesses in operating in this ecosystem. You can definitely come through the website, and we've got a direct portal to connect with us. We've also got outbound inquiries. We attend every single accelerator demo event we possibly can. We are judging some of those accelerator programs. We work really closely with Heads Over Heels and Springboard. We obviously have started working really effectively with StartMate. So, getting to know the venture capital community and seeing where those pipelines of deals, and trying to be everywhere we possibly can for those female founders to know how to connect with us. And we also get a lot of great inbound referrals. So, most of our investors are interested in this space already, and they're looking at startups all the time as well. And it's sometimes they're actually judging. They say, "Oh, there's no women in the business," but if they're seeing a great female-led business or a female co-founded business, typically we'll get a referral if there's a good business behind it that they want us to have a look at, and we're very engaged with those as well. So there's a lot happening, and it's been pretty exciting.
And okay, so we've got so now sort of understanding Scale. Now the next part is obviously the let's say the more interesting part from the investor side, in how we actually, what I would love to know is, number one, what you are seeing, right, from your perspective. You would have seen a lot of opportunities over the last 4 to 5 months. You would have seen a lot of things changing in that time frame. And also, what is the thesis in how you're approaching the next sort of 6 to 12 months?
Sure. So in my time with Scale, we have seen a lot of disruption in various industries, but where I get really excited is health, education, and almost digitizing all of those operational tasks. So I was actually, this morning, I was listening to the podcast with Minuri G, who just got funding from Square Peg on her business, Health Match.
As soon as I saw that business, I thought it was brilliant. Like, we've worked with a lot of life science companies, and we know the issues that they have in actually getting people to participate in their trials.
Totally. And so, and where Scale really punches above our weight is with market insiders who have worked in some of these larger businesses or these massive industries, which are ripe for disruption, through operational tasks. And Minuri talked about that really well in that podcast, where she said, it was amazing to her that there was this huge opportunity to bring clinical trials to market, but there was these operational hurdles, is I believe what she said. And that's where Scale does really well, is also because we were talking to another company earlier this year by a really impressive female founder who has worked in procurement her whole career for like over 20 years. She's like the bee's knees in procurement. Now, nobody gets excited about procurement, but it's a massive business.
Yeah.
And she's really good at it. And so where we operating found can recognize a particular market, and they've got a solution. And so when our network recognizes that, and we equally have skills to bring into that conversation, that's where we operate really well. So corporates that are being disrupted and where our investors see an opportunity, myself included, will operate really well. And that translates into education. So we have a lot of parents, a lot of caregivers. We invested in Talkie Play a couple of years ago. She's clearly doing a great job in helping teach kids to talk, and that's never been more relevant than in COVID.
Yeah.
And also healthcare. So the challenge with healthcare, as you and I both know, is that it can be a really long, protracted investment. And so we'll only invest in companies where we can see that there's an exit in the next 10 years. Pharma is hard.
Yeah.
That's like 20 years.
So typically
But
more health tech and med tech would be your focus then.
yeah, and very clear value propositions where the founder is clearly articulating what they're solving, and we can see a path to exit or a path to acquisition of some sort, or a partnering pathway where our investors can add value to that business and that founder.
Interesting. Now, for the next, so this is my sort of favorite question. Once again, from your perspective, everything that you're seeing and the trends that you're observing, what does the next 5 to 10 years look like from your perspective? Like, what do you think will be the big trends that will start to dominate? Are we seeing them already? And how can investors best capitalize from your perspective, do you think, on some of those trends?
Sure. So that's a big question, Steve. So I will answer this with my scale hat on, because again, we see this really clear market opportunity for backing diversity. And that is now well and truly translating across to not only corporates, but also some of the other investors operating really increasingly better in this space, being superannuation. And so now that we're seeing venture capital wheels getting proper funding, we're seeing superannuation getting involved in this space. My vision for the next 10 years is that Australia will punch above its weight in some of those areas of the economy that we're really strong on. Again, education, healthcare, financial services, corporate services. We're very good as customers at sort of, I don't want to say we're fickle, but we're really good at sussing out, businesses that are value add versus businesses that are a little bit, in America, you can put a lot of marketing on something and get a lot of traction. The Australian consumer is pretty good at vetting a proper value add service. So for Australia, I think there's a massive growth opportunity in the next decade. To extend on what has already started happening in angel community and venture capital community. I've noticed with interest, the Australian Business Growth Fund has been funded, and that's going to start investing later this year. The Victorian Business Growth Fund has been co-funded, and that's going to start investing in the next couple of quarters. So you're going to see this natural pipeline effect where you've got your seed investment, you've got your Series A, and that's where angel venture capital play. And then now we're seeing a lot of activity in private equity. In this current economic cycle where we're all looking for growth, those green shoots are happening. And I think there's going to be a lot of consolidation, a lot more efficiency built in. And we're looking forward to playing in that space too.
Brilliant. Completely agree. Well, thank you very much, Ariane. Really, really appreciate your time. I said I've been following you now for some time. I remember I've been around long enough to remember the actual launch of Scale, and I thought, what a brilliant idea. And I actually just thought it was fantastic that someone was taking the initiative, because carving out your own niche is not one of the easiest things to do. And what I love about you guys is obviously being passionate, being dedicated, but also more than that, in you specifically, I love how you're building the ecosystem around it as well, which is why we love inviting you and why we love involving you in our sort of different activities.
Really appreciate it. And for everybody involved, impact investing is not a feel-good exercise.
Just when your internet drops out again.
I know that. Sorry. There's a lot happening in this space, and really appreciate your time as well. I've enjoyed watching what you've built, and I've enjoyed the collaboration. So thanks for the conversation.
Thanks, Ariane. Look forward to speaking soon.
Sounds good.